opposite the House of Sculptures. Merchant Street rambled crookedly downhill, overlooked by the houses and churches of the upper part of yuriatin. At the corner there was the dark grey house with sculptures. The huge square stones of the lower part of its facade were covered with freshly posted sheets of government newspapers and proclamations. Small groups of people stood on the sidewalk, reading in silence. After the recent thaw it was dry and frosty. Now it was light at a time of day when only a few weeks before it had been dark. The winter had just gone, and the emptiness it had left was filled by the light that lingered on into the evenings. The light made one restless, it was like a call from afar that was disturbing, it put one on one's guard. The whites had recently left the town, surrendering it to the reds. The bombardment, bloodshed, and wartime anxieties had ceased. This too was disturbing, and put one on one's guard, like the going of the winter and the lengthening of the spring days. One of the proclamations pasted on the wall and still readable by the light of the longer day announced: "Workbooks are obtainable by those qualified at the cost of 50 rubles each, at the food office, Yuriatin Soviet, 5 October Street. Formerly Governor Street. Room 137. Anyone without a workbook, or filling it in incorrectly, or, still worse, fraudulently, will be prosecuted with the utmost rigor of the wartime regulations. Detailed instructions for the correct use of workbooks are printed in I.Y.I.K. No. 86. 1013. For the current year and are posted at the Yuriatin Food Office, Room 137. Another proclamation stated that the town had ample food supplies. These, it said, were merely being hoarded by the bourgeoisie with the object of disorganizing distribution and creating chaos. It ended with the words: "Anyone found hoarding food will be shot on the spot." A third announcement read: "Those who do not belong to the exploiting class are admitted to membership in consumer associations. Details are obtainable at the food office, Yuriatin Soviet, 5 October Street. Formerly Governor Street. Room 137. Former members of the military were warned. Anyone who fails to surrender his arms or who continues carrying them without having the appropriate new permit will be prosecuted with the utmost severity of the law. New permits are obtainable at the office of the Yuriatin Revolutionary Military Committee, 6 October Street, Room 63. 2. The group in front of the building was joined by a wild-looking, emaciated man, black with grime, with a bag flung over his shoulder, and carrying a stick. There was not yet any white in his long, shaggy hair, but his bristly, dark blonde beard was graying. This was Yurii and I.Y.I.K. His fur coat must have been taken from him on the road, or perhaps he had bartered it for food. His thin, tattered, short-sleeved coat, which did not keep him warm, was the result of an exchange. All he had left in his bag was the remnant of a crust of bread that someone had given him out of charity, in a village near the town, and a piece of suet. He had reached Yuriatin somewhat earlier, but it had taken him a whole hour to trudge from the outskirts through which the railway ran to this corner of Merchant Street, so great was his weakness and so much had the last few days of the journey exhausted him. He had often stopped. And he had barely restrained an impulse to fall to his knees and kiss the stones of the town, which he had despaired of ever seeing again, and the sight of which filled him with happiness, like the sight of a friend. For almost half his journey on foot he had followed the railway track. All of it was out of use, neglected and covered with snow. He had passed train after train abandoned by the whites. They stood idle, stopped by the defeat of Kolchak, by lack of fuel, and by snowdrifts. Immobilized and buried in the snow, they stretched almost uninterruptedly for miles on end. Some of them served as strongholds for armed bands of highwaymen or as hideouts for escaping criminals or political fugitives, the involuntary vagrants of those days, but most of them had become Mortuaries and mass graves for the victims of the cold and of the typhus raging all along the line and mowing down whole villages. That period confirmed the ancient proverb, "Man is a wolf to man." Traveler turned off the road at the sight of traveler, stranger meeting stranger killed for fear of being killed. There were isolated cases of cannibalism. The laws of human civilization were suspended. The jungle law was in force. Man dreamed the prehistoric dreams of the cave dweller. Every now and then Yurii and I.Y.I.K would see lonely shadows stealing along the ditch or scurrying across the road ahead of him. He avoided them carefully whenever he could, but many of them seemed familiar. He imagined that he had seen them all at the partisan camp. In most cases he was mistaken, but once his eyes did not deceive him. The boy who darted out of a snowdrift that concealed a train of wagons lit, relieved himself, and darted back had indeed been a member of the Forest Brotherhood. It was Tangchibokinh, who was believed to have been shot dead. In reality he had only been wounded and had lost consciousness. When he came to, he had crawled away from the place of execution, hidden in the forest until he recovered from his wounds, and was now making his way home to Krestovostvichensk under an assumed name, hiding in the buried trains and running at the sight of human beings. These scenes and incidents had the strangeness of the transcendental, as if they were snatches torn from lives on other planets that had somehow drifted to the Earth. Only nature had remained true to history and appeared in the guise it assumed in modern art. Now and then there was a quiet, pale gray, dark rose evening, with birches, black and fine as script against the afterglow, and black streams faintly clouded over with gray ice flowing between steep white banks of snow blackened at the edges where the running water had eroded them. Such, in an hour or two, would be the evening in yuriatin. Frosty, gray transparent, and as soft as pussy willows. The doctor meant to read the notices posted on the House of Sculptures, but his eyes kept wandering to the third-floor windows of the house across the street. These were the windows of the rooms in which the furniture left by the previous occupants had been stored. Now, although the frost had filmed them at the edges, it was clear that the glass was transparent. The whitewash had evidently been removed. What did this mean? Had the former occupants returned? Or had Lara moved out and new tenants moved in, rearranging everything? The uncertainty was unbearable. The doctor crossed the street, went in, and climbed the front staircase he knew so well and which was so dear to him. How often at the camp he had recalled the open work pattern of the cast iron steps down to the last scroll. In one place you could look through the lumber room in the basement where broken chairs and old pails and tin tubs had been stacked. They were still there. Nothing had changed. The doctor was almost grateful to the staircase for its loyalty to the past. There had been a doorbell once, but it had broken and stopped ringing even before the doctor had been captured by the partisans. He was about to knock when he noticed that there was now a padlock on the door, hanging from two rings roughly screwed into the old oak panels with their fine carving, which in places had come away. Such destructiveness would have been inconceivable in the old days. There would have been a fitted lock, and if it had been out of order there were locksmiths to repair it. This trifling detail was eloquent of the general deterioration of things, which had gone a great deal further in his absence. The doctor was sure that Lara and Katenka were not at home. Perhaps they were not even in yuriatin, and perhaps they were not even alive. He was prepared for the worst. It was only in order not to leave a stone unturned that he decided to look for the key in the hollow between the bricks, where a rat had so greatly frightened Katenka. He kicked at the wall, to make sure of not putting his hand on one now. He had not the slightest hope of finding anything. The hollow was closed by a brick. He removed it and felt inside. Oh, miracle! A key and a note. It was a long note covering a large sheet of paper. He took it to the window on the landing. Another miracle, even more unbelievable. The note was addressed to him. He read it quickly. Lord, what happiness! They say you are alive and have turned up. Someone saw you near the town and rushed over to tell me. I take it you'll go straight to Varikino, so I'm going there with Katanka. But just in case, I'm leaving the key in the usual place. Wait for me, don't move. You'll see I am using the front rooms now. The flat is rather empty, I've had to sell some of the furniture. I've left a little food, boiled potatoes mostly. Put the lid back on the saucepan with a weight on it, to keep the rats out. I'm mad with joy. He read to the bottom of the page, and did not notice that the letter continued on the back. He pressed it to his lips, folded it, and put it into his pocket with the key. Mixed with his immense joy, he felt a sharp, stabbing pain. Since Lara was going to Varikino, and not even bothering to explain, it must be that his family were not there. He felt not only anxious because of this, but unbearably aggrieved and sad about them. Why hadn't she said a single word of how and where they were? As if they didn't exist at all. But it was getting darker, and he had still many things to do while it was light. One of the most urgent was to read the texts of the decrees posted in the street. It was no trifling matter in those days to be ignorant of the regulations. It might cost you your life. Without going into the flat or taking off his bag, he went down and crossed the street, to the wall thickly covered with various announcements. 3. There were newspaper articles, texts of speeches at meetings, and decrees. Yurii and I.Y.I.K glanced at the headings. Requisitioning, assessment, and taxation of members of the propertied classes. Establishment of workers' control. Factory and plant committees. These were the regulations the new authorities had issued on entering the town in place of those that had been in force. No doubt, Yurii and I.Y.I.K thought, they were intended as a reminder of the uncompromising nature of the new regime, in case it had been forgotten under the whites. But these monotonous, endless repetitions made his head go around. What period did they belong to? That of the first upheaval, or of some later re-establishment of the regime after a white rebellion? Had they been composed last year? The year before? Only once in his life had this uncompromising language and single-mindedness filled him with enthusiasm. Was it possible that he must pay for that rash enthusiasm all his life by never hearing, year after year, anything but these unchanging, shrill, crazy exclamations and demands, which became progressively more impractical, meaningless, and unfulfillable as time went by? Was it possible that because of one moment of overgenerous response he had been enslaved forever? His eyes lit on a fragment of a speech. The reports on the famine disclose the unbelievable inactivity of the local organizations. There are glaring abuses, there is speculation on a gigantic scale, but what are our regional and municipal factory committees doing? Only mass searches in the commercial districts of Yuriatin and Rajvili, only terror. Applied in all its harshness, down to the shooting of speculators on the spot, can deliver us from famine. What an enviable blindness! Thought the doctor. To be able to talk of bread when it has long since vanished from the face of the earth. Of propertied classes and speculators when they have long since been abolished by earlier decrees. Of peasants and villages that no longer exist. Don't they remember their own plans and measures, which long since turned life upside down? What kind of people are they, to go on raving? With this never-cooling, feverish ardor, year in, year out, on non-existent, long-vanished subjects, and to know nothing, to see nothing around them? The doctor's head was spinning. He fainted and fell down unconscious on the sidewalk. When he came to and people helped him to get up and offered to take him where he wished to go, he thanked them and refused, saying he had only to cross the street. 4. He went up again, and this time he unlocked the door of Lara's flat. It was still light on the landing, no darker than before he had gone out. He was glad that the sun was not hurrying him. The creaking of the door touched off a commotion inside. The uninhabited flat greeted him with the clang and rattle of falling tin pans. Rats, scuttling off the shelves, plopped onto the floor and scattered. They must have bread here by the thousands. The doctor felt sick and